Alright, it's been out for long enough, so here we go. Spoilers for Saw X. So Saw X takes place between the first Saw and Saw 2, so John Kramer is still alive, and we know that at this point he's been diagnosed with cancer. We see John in the hospital being told that he only has a few months left to live, and meanwhile he sees this custodian who is stealing from a patient. And he has this fantasy that he puts this custodian in the eye sucker trap, where basically he has to break 5 of his fingers before the timer runs out or get his eyes sucked out through these tubes. So yes, this famous trap did not actually happen, it just happened in John's mind. Then we see John attending this support group for cancer patients. He meets Henry, who is another person who is diagnosed with cancer. A little while later, we see John sitting in a cafe where he runs into Henry, but this time Henry is completely healthy. He tells John that he participated in this experimental cancer treatment led by this Norwegian doctor, Dr. Peterson. And his daughter, Cecilia Peterson, is now spearheading the whole thing. John contacts her and she's like, you know what, this is a very special case. You don't have a lot of time left. We're going to accept you. Fly out to Mexico City. So John gets there and he's driven to the clinic by a taxi driver named Diego. They stage this weird kidnapping, carjacking ploy to vet him, basically. It's kind of weird. He meets this young girl named Gabriella who claims that she had cancer before and was cured by Dr. Peterson. He meets the rest of the team, including Valentina, Mateo, and Dr. Cortez. He also meets another patient named Parker who is undergoing surgery as well. He also meets a young boy named Carlos, who is the caretaker's son, and the two of them really bond. It's really cute. So John goes in for surgery, but as he's kind of out of it, he sees the screen and it's this weird brain surgery video. But regardless, he goes under, and when he comes to the next day, Cecilia tells him the surgery was successful and you are now cancer-free. So John's feeling great. We actually see him in the park destroying a sketch of one of his traps. So we basically get the impression like this has given him a new outlook on life. He's not going to be the Jigsaw killer anymore. He decides to go buy a bottle of tequila to go gift to Gabriella. But when he returns to the clinic, it is completely empty. And he goes into the room where the surgery was created and finds a video of a brain surgery, which is the exact video that he saw. And finally, he realizes that this whole operation was a scam and he still has cancer. So obviously, John Kramer does what John Kramer does best. He goes for Diego, the taxi driver, first once he realizes that he was playing Dr. Cortez. He Jimmy rigs these pipe bombs to Diego's arms and then duct tapes his hands with scalpels at the end, leaving him no option but to cut the pipe bombs out of his arms, which he successfully does. Diego actually survives this trap. And then we see the other 4, so Cecilia, Gabriella, Valentina, and Mateo, get kidnapped by somebody in a very familiar mask. And who is the person in the mask? Yup, none other than Amanda Young, Jigsaw's apprentice. The 4 of them wake up chained and Cecilia's like, oh shit, you are the Jigsaw killer, huh? Because again, this is between 1 and 2, so we know there's a Jigsaw killer, but John obviously hadn't been caught yet. And they start the game. So the first one to be tested is Valentina, and this to me is the most vile and disgusting trap in all of the Saw franchise. Valentina is tasked with cutting off her leg with a jiggly saw and then inserting a tube in it to suck out enough bone marrow to save her before she is decapitated. Valentina honestly does pretty good and manages to cut her leg off and insert the tube, but the bone marrow does not come out in time, and she... So the remaining 3 are like, okay, well what the fuck do we do now? Cecilia comes up with this bright idea of disemboweling Valentina's body to use her intestines as a rope. And she uses that rope to get a table, which was weirdly intentionally left by Amanda in the middle of the room. And she grabs her cell phone and makes a call, but before she can get anywhere with that call, Amanda takes it. Meanwhile, John and Amanda are kind of going back and forth about who's going to be next because John said Gabriella's next. But Gabriella is struggling with addiction, so Amanda obviously really resonates with that, and she feels for Gabriella. Meanwhile, a man that we recognize, Parker, breaks into the clinic. Amanda manages to subdue him, and he explains to John and Amanda that he is there because he also was deceived and thought that he was getting his cancer removed. Or cured. And while that's happening, it's Mateo's turn to be put in a trap. Mateo is tasked with drilling into his own skull and removing a piece of his brain tissue. He almost manages to do it, but alas, he does not do it in time. And this heat mask closes on his face and kills him. Meanwhile, Parker is watching all this and is like, what the fuck is wrong with you people? And then it's Gabriella's turn. So Gabriella has 2 shackles, one around her wrist and one around her ankle. And she is suspended in front of this radiation lamp. And basically what she needs to do is use a sledgehammer to break both her wrist and her ankle to get out of this before this burns her to death. And she does it. She's badly injured, but she manages to do it, and John tells Amanda to take her to a hospital. However, at this point, they had freed Parker, who grabs the gun and turns it on them. And he demands for them to free Cecilia. So they do that, and once they do, this sadistic bitch goes over and kills Gabriella. And she reveals that she's the one who called Parker and he was part of the scam the whole time. And they're also in a relationship. So there's one trap remaining that's weirdly meant for 2 people, but nobody ever puts that together. And Cecilia demands John to strap himself into it. And as that's happening, they start to hear a sound at the door. And that sound is Carlos. And Cecilia grabs him and chains him to the trap as well. I had to make this black and white so you can't really tell what's going on, but this is the bloodboarding trap. So John is on one end and Carlos is on the other end. And the only instruction that John gives to Carlos is no hala, which hala is the Spanish word for pull that Carlos taught John earlier. So the way this trap works is it's going to lean 2 ways. And when it leans back, it literally waterboards the person leaning back with blood. But if they pull their lever, then it will lean to the other person. That's why John said to Carlos, don't pull, because he's basically going to sacrifice himself for Carlos. But Carlos, being the little angel he is, understands what's happening and pulls his lever. But John's not going to let that happen, so he pulls his back and now he's just holding his and he's accepting his death. But never forget that John Kramer is always 15 steps ahead of everybody else. So while this is happening and John's literally dying, Cecilia and Parker are in the room looking for the bag of money, which was all of Cecilia's money that she made from scamming her patients. But when they find it, they activate a tripwire and the room starts filling with chemical gas and they get locked in. They start hearing a message from John saying that Diego outed all of the scammers, so they knew that Parker was in it from the beginning. So this was all part of the master plan. So Amanda intentionally leaving that cell phone in the middle of the room was purposeful, because they knew Cecilia would call Parker. They also knew that Cecilia would ultimately sacrifice Parker to live, which is exactly what she does. There is one window to allow for ventilation, and she kills Parker so that she can use that window to get out of the chemical gas. And when that trap activated, it also deactivated the trap that John and Carlos were in. And Cecilia is left trapped as John, Amanda, and Carlos walk out victoriously. But don't forget about our boy Henry, because there's a post-credit scene. So Henry was also in on this the whole time. And he wakes up in a bathroom that looks all too familiar. And he has a familiar accomplice with him. The movie ends with Hoffman and John surrounding Henry as he is strapped into a trap.